Mindfulness is remembering, but not simply remembering things from the past, but rather bearing in mind. Bearing in mind. And so it turns out that the English term, mindfulness, is actually a perfect translation of this ancient term denoting a particular faculty of the mind, because the noun mindfulness comes from the adjective mindful, comes from the verb to mind. And so as we say, the British especially, in British English, mind your head. Mind your head. If you're stepping onto a bus and there's a low overhead there, mind your head. It's not saying maintain non-judgmental moment-to-moment awareness of the bus. It's saying mind your head. You might want to duck here if you're a tall person. Mind your head. Or parents will tell their children, if they're good parents and they're raising their children well, children, we have guests coming this evening and I want you all to mind your manners. Remember, we've taught you good manners. When guests come, how do you speak to them? How do you engage? What is polite way to engage with guests or anybody else? So children, we have some important guests coming tonight. Please mind your manners. That is, bear it in mind. Or a teacher may tell his or her students, mind what I say. I'm giving you instructions now. I want you to mind what I say. Here are these topics. I'm writing on the blackboard. Mind what I'm writing down here because this will appear on the final examination. So bear this in mind. And that is the verb to mind, which means bear in mind. A person who is bearing in mind something is mindful, and that faculty of being mindful is called mindfulness. So a definition of mindfulness, it happens to be in the Buddhist context, but this is not religious in any sense of the term. It's a psychological definition, but in the Buddhist context. The definition of mindfulness here is a non-forgetfulness of the mind with respect to a familiar object. Your parents have taught you good manners. You've heard it, but are you bearing it in mind when you meet with other people, with guests, and so forth? Are you bearing it in mind without forgetting? So it's a non-forgetfulness of the mind with respect to something that is familiar. You've learned it, but did you forget it? And it has the function of non-distraction. So on the one hand, you're bearing it in mind and not forgetting about it when the time comes that you really need to remember it. But it also has the function of non-distraction. Your mind doesn't wander off. You don't get distracted. But when you need to bear it in mind, it's right there. And you are being mindful. And you're exercising mindfulness. Now this is crucial for education, in the workplace, as we are attending to each other, engaging in conversation with a spouse, a child, a friend, conversations in the workplace. Are we bearing in mind the person with whom we're conversing without forgetting, spacing out, and without being distracted? So I find this pragmatically a very useful definition of mindfulness. And meditatively, and we'll get to this shortly, there is mindfulness of breathing. This is not remembering breaths in the past, but it is an ongoing bearing in mind of the inflow, the outflow, the rhythm of the respiration. And so there is retrospective mindfulness, and this is literally remembering things from the past. We have many things to remember. There is present-centered mindfulness, such as mindfully painting a canvas, mindfully playing music, mindfully, if you're an air traffic controller, mindfully attending to the air traffic landing and taking off from the airport, not forgetting, not spacing out, not becoming distracted. Mindfulness, very practical, and at all times. The popular definition or the psychological definition, I've already said it's very useful. But if you're holding a job interview, you're the boss of a business, and a person is applying for a job, that's not a time to observe and engage with this person in a non-judgmental way. You need to evaluate, is this person the right person for the job? You need to use discriminating intelligence. You need to apply mindfulness. And so this type of mindfulness is useful at all times. Whereas simply resting in a non-judgmental awareness of whatever comes up, that's very good when we have leisure. But not when you're driving a car, not when you're conducting a job interview, not when you're doing any kind of serious work that needs your full attention and your powers of discernment, of intelligent discernment. So I'm simply saying this is a different definition of mindfulness. And it's proven itself for more than 2 millennia to have great pragmatic value. But mindfulness in this meditative context is very often coupled with a companion mental faculty, and that is, we can call it introspection or metacognition. So one 5th century Indian Buddhist sage named Asanga, he summarizes the distinction between mindfulness and introspection, writing that these are taught. For the first, mindfulness prevents the attention from straying from a meditative object or whatever you wish to focus on. It prevents it from straying. So you can bear it in mind, stay focused, remain engaged with whatever you're attending to. While the second, introspection, recognizes that the attention is straying. So psychologically, the second is often called metacognition. And that is the awareness of our own minds. When you are working at your computer, at your desktop, and you're doing some work, sometimes you might become distracted. How do you know you're distracted? Well, by being able to monitor your own mental states. So I'm going to return to this. But our ability to be aware of the thoughts that are arising, aware of our emotions, aware of our desires. When we are cultivating mindfulness, aware when our attention is straying from the meditative object. We've been distracted. Or we're just falling into laxity, into dullness, and forgetting. So introspection is really like the quality control of mindfulness. It enables us to recognize when the mindfulness is very present, it's clear, it's stable, it's continuous, and when it fades, when it becomes distracted or becomes dull. And so these 2 faculties of the mind, mindfulness and introspection, these are enormously important for any type of endeavor we might engage in. Now, in this contemplative context, introspection is not confined just to observing one's own mind, but rather it is a reflexive kind of awareness. We can be mindful of anything, but when we're practicing introspection, we are specting intro, we're observing intro. Well, of course, this means being aware of our own mental states, whether the mind is agitated, it's calm, it's clear, or dull. It's virtuous, or maybe on occasion, not so much. It may be really quite afflicted in some way. Angry, irritated, jealous, and so on. But this ability to introspectively monitor our mental states is an ability that can be honed, developed, improved to very, very high levels. And it's primarily the contemplative traditions of the world, not just any one of them, that are the major resources or places to look for learning how to develop both introspection and mindfulness. Now, one practical method for developing mindfulness, it's retrospective mindfulness, remembering things in the past. It's present-centered mindfulness, and that is bearing in mind, for example, the rhythm of the respiration as you breathe in, you breathe out. But there's also, just to complete the triad, there's also prospective mindfulness. And this is bearing in mind things that we need to do or attend to in the future. So perhaps you're driving off to work and your spouse had said, when you come home, please stop by the shopping market, the grocery market, and pick up some milk and some eggs and some cheese. Please don't forget, because we need this for dinner tonight. And so then you're off to work and you're very much focusing on your work throughout the course of the day, and then you're driving home. The question is, now that you're driving home 8 hours since you left home, Do you remember now what you prospectively were bearing in mind, or do you get home and say, I'm sorry, I forgot? So cultivating mindfulness by way of mindfulness of the breathing is a time-tested method. So the practice of mindfulness of breathing entails, now there are different methods, but I'll speak of one that I found to be very useful, and it's been practiced literally for centuries. It's sitting quietly. You can be seated on a chair with your back straight. I have quite a good chair here for that. You could be sitting cross-legged, but you could, for that matter, you could be lying in the supine position on your back with your arms out to the side, totally relaxed. And it entails bearing in mind in an ongoing way. When the breath is long, the in-breath is long, you know it is long. When the out-breath is long, you know it is long. When the in-breath is short, you know it's short. When the out-breath is short, you know it's short. And as you settle into this continuous flow of the in and out breath, then more and more you're attending to the whole cycle of breath after breath, being continuously and mindfully present with the flow of the respiration, passively, in the sense that you're not controlling it, but discerningly. You're wide awake, you're not spacing out. Now, this practice of mindfulness of breathing is in fact a very practical entry into the cultivation of genuine well-being. Because when you're attending to the rhythm of the in and out breath, that rhythm itself, or the tactile sensations of the breath that you might experience at the nostrils, or with the rise and fall of the abdomen as you breathe in and out, these sensations, or the awareness of the rhythm itself, is not particularly pleasant. It doesn't give rise to hedonic pleasure, but it's not unpleasant. You don't respond to it with aversion, quite neutral. But by focusing on that rhythm, which is neither pleasant nor unpleasant, but neutral, and learning how, with discipline, how to maintain the mindfulness on something that is not arousing a hedonic pleasurable response, is a way of cultivating a quality of contentment, of presence, that is not stimulus-driven. It takes us away temporarily from the pursuit of pleasant stimulation that can drive whole lives. But we need, if we want to cultivate this inner well-being of the mind, then we need to turn our attention, at least temporarily, away from pursuing pleasure outwardly.